Hey y'all, my name's Sarah and welcome to my channel. So in today's video, I'm going to be discussing a list that I came up with, which is 5 beginner reptiles I personally think would be good for, well, a beginner. This is just a list that I picked arbitrarily by myself. You don't necessarily have to follow it, but I think it would be a good guidelines for maybe a tiebreaker if you're stuck between 2 different kinds of species. But before I get to the list, I'm going to talk about why I think reptiles should be good pets. Well, they live longer than dogs and cats, and they require less attention, I would say. Your snake or lizard's not really going to want to hang out with you as much as a dog or cat. So for college students or someone in an apartment, that would be great. We have a snake that's very popular in the pet trade. They're called ball pythons, and I think that although they're very popular, I don't think they make good beginner snakes, and I'm going to talk to you all about why. Now, speaking of ball pythons, this is my ball python Simon here. Sorry, he's shedding a little bit, so I apologize for that, but normally he's gorgeous. Anyway, so ball pythons, they're wonderful. As you can see, I have one myself, but there are a few things for beginners that are not ready for. For example, they can have very high humidity, which is not something normally beginners are equipped for. So for example, they require higher humidity, they need more different type of enclosure, and they also require, and they're also very picky eaters. What that means is that although they can eat a staple diet of rodents, they can also be very picky. And basically they say they can just decide to go off feed and not eat for a while, whether that be your husbandry is not correct, or they could just not feel like it. And that's something that beginners are kind of creeped out about. It's kind of scary not having a snake to eat for months, or maybe I've even seen a ball python go off feed for a year. And so for those reasons, I don't think that ball pythons are good for beginners. All right, I'm going to put him back and I'll get on with the list. All right, number 5, I picked the bearded dragon. And whenever you think of bearded dragons, most people think of the lizard whenever people think of pet lizards. Now, the reason why they're number 5 on this list is not higher is because, well, one, they're a fairly big lizard, and so they're going to need a lot of space in a fairly large enclosure, and that can get pretty expensive. And then 2 is because they have very specific lighting requirements. So all bearded dragons require UVB lighting, which is detrimental to their health if they don't have. So they can get bone disease. Their bones might not develop correctly if you don't have this lighting, and the lighting is not cheap. So that's something to consider. But besides that, they're awesome lizards. They're very personable. They're very fun to have around, and I can see why that they're very popular because the lizards themselves are fairly cheap. All right, and so number 4 is actually 2 snake species. Sorry about that. I know it's kind of cheating. So I did both the milk snake and the king snake because they're very similar species. King snakes are a little easier to find in pet stores, but milk snakes are also in the same. They kind of require the same care and such. They're very hardy eaters, which is awesome. You always want a good beginner snake to be able to eat well. And they're very curious little fellas. They come out during the day and hang out with you whenever they want to. The only thing that kind of is iffy about them is that whenever they're very small, they can have attitudes. So they can buzz their tail at you, they can strike, and sometimes beginners are not about that. They would rather have a snake that's just chill all the time. Another thing is that I've had this personally happen to me. Whenever they get nervous, they musk, which is like a foul smelling liquid, and it stinks. It stinks so bad. So that's one thing that you should keep in mind. But if you want a snake to chill with you through the day, they're perfect. Alrighty, for number 3 we have Crested Geckos. This is my Crested Gecko Chester, and we'll see how he stays still. He's quite a jumper. And so that would be a con for these little guys. They are masters of acrobatics, so they jump very high, and it's a little scary for some people because they're not expecting it. But Crested Geckos are awesome. One thing that's great about them is that they don't require any lighting at all whatsoever, which is nice. That's That's a cage requirement that a lot of people are iffy about. And then he does require misting because he's very bougie and doesn't like you. Yeah, you are. You don't like. They don't require water bowls, so you have to mist their enclosure every day to keep so they can drink and keep hydrated. And they don't even need bugs, which is a hang up for some people. They just require a powdered. It's like a fruity powdered diet. It's called, you can get Rapashi or Pangea. He prefers Pangea papaya. It's his favorite. And they live fairly long, I would say. So they're great for beginners, I feel like. You're so cute. Look at you. This is Ozzy, my leopard gecko, and I chose leopard geckos for my number 2 Avesta beginner species because, one, they're very easy to get. Any pet store is going to have them. They're fairly cheap in anything that they require. They don't need a huge enclosure like bearded dragons, and they don't require misting like leopard geckos. They do require bugs, so people who don't like bugs, be warned, but the bugs are fairly cheap to get also. You can get them in a pet store for maybe like $1 for like 20 crickets, which is pretty good. And they don't eat every day, maybe every other day, which is another good thing. And you don't see that with dogs and cats. And so the other thing about them is that they do require lighting, and but that's again very, very cheap and very easy to get. So that's why I put them at number 2, and they're just awesome little guys. I mean, look at them. And so that leaves number 1. What could it be? All right, and so for number 1, we have the corn snake. The corn snake is very easy to find in pet stores. There's so many different colors and patterns you can choose from. And the enclosure doesn't have to be ginormous like a bearded dragon's. What's great about corn snakes is that although they do require a lighting requirement to some degree, they do not have to have UVB, which is amazing. So that means that they don't need it to survive. And another great thing about corn snakes is that they eat very well. So what that means is that if anytime you offer them food, they're gonna take it, which is great for beginners in my opinion. You don't want the nervousness of wondering, is my snake going to eat today? Is he going to refuse? You won't have none of that. You won't have to worry about it. Another good thing is that it doesn't matter if it's going to be frozen or live, they're going to take it. So frozen, like, you can easily just thaw it out, they don't care. They're they're garbage disposals, they don't care. So with that being said, they're easy to care for. You don't need to, if you handle them at all, they're going to be super docile. They're not going to bite you. They're not going to musk on you, unlike king snakes, which is wonderful. So that is why that is my number 1 pick. So that was my top 5 beginner reptile list. You don't have to get any of these species. I was just giving out a few popular options that most people choose. I would say the main key thing is to think about, 1, is it easy to care for? 2, is it easily obtainable? And then 3, can I handle it? That would be the top 3 things I would consider if you don't get any of these species, which is totally fine. Reptiles are a joy to have, and it's a very fun hobby to get into. So hopefully I helped narrow down some of those options for you guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.